Tim, Allbirds is a young company, but it's definitely not an overnight success. Tell us when and where the idea first came about.
The idea was born probably back circa 2008. I was back in New Zealand playing professional football in the A-League in Australia. I was sponsored by one of the big sportswear companies that shall not be named, getting all sorts of free gear. And the insight was that footwear seemed to change all the time, have bright logos, be brightly coloured, and it was very, very difficult to find simple. And so I stumbled into this enormous category that I knew nothing about. I visited my first footwear factory in one of my off seasons, and I discovered an industry that largely defaulted to making shoes out of synthetics and not very nice materials. And I imagined a different type of business model and a footwear brand anchored in purpose and the idea of using sustainable materials.
And you launched a Kickstarter in 2014.
I was fortunate enough to go to the World Cup in 2010 with New Zealand and retired after that to come to London and go to business school, and I took this entrepreneurial idea and was encouraged by a professor to launch it onto Kickstarter so that it could fail and I could work out what I wanted to do with my life. I think there was lots of challenges to actually build a global supply chain. Making shoes is a very, very difficult thing to do. So there was a lot of hurdles to overcome, but I kept on going, and in 2014 launched that to the market.
Yeah, and did he support the idea from the beginning?
As is always the way, he's now a friend and he's become an investor in the company, and the only reason he was so critical was because he cared, but it was another tough moment on the journey to kind of take this idea from nothing to something.
So you launched with Kickstarter, and what happened?
It took off. Overnight, we had 1,000 pairs to sell, and they disappeared in 4 days. There was global demand for the product, and I think we tapped into the idea that there was interest in shoes made out of materials other than synthetics, and that there was a market for innovation. And our first material was focused on wool, and it really seemed to connect with people.
Did you realise there was that demand in the market, or how did that kind of slip under your radar?
I didn't start with a business plan. I didn't do extensive market research. I had a personal problem that was deeply my own, and I set out to solve it. And it turned out that was something that was more widely shared, and it seemed to work. And so we set out to do it. And it just took a long, long time and hundreds of prototypes to work out how to do it. And eventually ended up with us moving from London to San Francisco to partner with Joey and to launch Allbirds in early 2016.
So Joey came in and he was a bit critical of the product.
Yeah, our wives were roommates in college and best friends, and they introduced us, and we'd seen each other at weddings. But the idea that we were going to work together on the business was not something that we realised. But he'd committed his career to the idea of sustainability and material innovation, and the belief that there was this impending revolution in the way that things were going to need to be made, and that the climate crisis was the problem of our generation, and the fashion industry had a huge problem to solve. And so we joined forces to found Allbirds with that purpose at the core of everything that we were doing.
What was that purpose that you were aligned on? Did you see that there was a problem within the fashion industry that you wanted to solve? Did you see that the consumer was changing their habits?
Yeah, a few things. The footwear industry makes about 20 billion pairs of shoes a year on average, usually out of not very nice things. It's the equivalent. The fashion industry has the equivalent carbon emissions of the entire continent of Europe, and there was this enormous sort of problem to be solved within the footwear and fashion space. And we believed that business would be part of that solution, and that there was a huge opportunity for a small business to build this with sustainability at its core, with a blank sheet of paper, imagining products that made sustainability a non-negotiable in the way that they were made. And so we set out to do that with our first shoe and our first material innovation, and launched Allbirds on the 1st of March 2016.
Time magazine had some nice words for you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that people don't buy sustainable products, they buy great products. And the whole premise of using sustainable material innovation was to create a greater comfort experience. Comfort is the #1 reason why people buy shoes, but it's often equated with ugliness. So the idea of bringing this enormous design focus to shoes was also part of the story. And we launched with one shoe. And traditionally in footwear, you go through wholesale and you have a range of styles, and they change every season. We had one shoe, and we sold it direct to consumer through our own website, initially in America and New Zealand, and that was quite different to how footwear traditionally is executed.
Australia, or America and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. They were your two markets,
sure.
But now you're in big expansion mode. So what questions did you kind of ask to see, okay, well, is this viable to go outside of these two key markets?
What we quickly understood there was a consumer in Auckland and in Shanghai, where we now have an office, and in London and in Berlin and in San Francisco, that all were starting to care deeply about the provenance of the things that they wear and buy, that was starting to understand that there was a real climate emergency and that we needed to find better ways to make things. So from the beginning we imagined Allbirds as a global brand, and we've on the back of some early success in those first two markets, we've been able to expand now into the UK and into Europe as of a few months ago, and it's really, really exciting. And I think it's about global solutions. It's about imagining the types of material innovations that we're talking about, not just as small things, but as large innovations that could really, really impact the larger footwear market.
And I guess it's solving problems that are worldwide.
Yeah, this is not a New Zealand problem or a UK problem. This is a global problem, and we need to act with a different set of processes, with transparency in mind, sharing best practice, sharing information. Our third big material innovation was a green EVA made from sugarcane, and we launched it, took it to market, and then made it open source for the entire footwear industry to use, and have seen 100 companies globally come in to try and use this material. And I think it showcases a different way of working in the pursuit of finding solutions to the sustainability problem.
So you have a physical presence here in London. We're sitting in your lovely Covent Garden store. You can't walk down the high street in the UK without seeing heavy discounting signs, closing down signs. UK retail consumer spending is the lowest on record for this month. You're optimistic about London and the UK as a market?
Certainly there's challenges. I mean, it's a complicated time in the UK at the moment, certainly, and the cost of doing business here in terms of rates for opening stores are higher, certainly, than many of the other places that we're doing that around the world. But we're incredibly excited about the UK market. I think you have a customer here that in many ways is advanced in the global conversation about the importance of the environment and the importance of the fashion industry finding better ways to do things. And we've been here now nearly a year. I've had a store in Covent Garden. We're going to add more over time, and have seen a great response from customers that I think are really attracted to brands that have purpose at the core of what they're doing.
So you're committed to the UK?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in many ways, this idea was a bad idea in the UK many years ago, and somewhere where I lived for a period of time, and have a close affinity for this market. And I think we're really, really pleased with the progress we've made out of the gate.
Looking broadly at the market, your production and supply chains and distribution crisscross the world. Mm-hmm. Is supply chains and trade wars any kind of concern for you?
Yeah, of course it is. There's no question that the China-US sort of tariff situation is not always easy. But look, I think you just need to be nimble. You need to plan, and you need to have alternatives in every particular case within your supply chain. And we've tried to do that and be smart, knowing that we can't control any of those decisions, and we just need to be able to react quickly when things change.
Within the market of retail, how important is a physical presence versus online? Does it totally depend really on the product? You walk in here and there's a story to be heard.
Yeah, we started as an online only business, but we always imagined retail would be a part of our story. I think everyone's got a childhood memory of being fitted for shoes with that metal device that no one knows the name of. And so the importance of retail and footwear was always clear. What's been surprising to us has been the impact that it has on our online business. So when we launch a store in a market, we have a halo in our online traffic and purchases. So the interaction between those two things, I think, is a really important part of the direct-to-consumer narrative. We've said no largely to all wholesale, so we own the ecosystem and can control every sort of consumer touch point, whether they meet us first in a retail store or online, and the control of that ecosystem, I think, is a big competitive advantage, and it allows us to get a great deal of feedback and really invest deeply in that customer relationship.
Yeah, I get the sense that listening is very important at Allbirds, from the educator listening to what the customer wants in store to you guys listening to your employees. And I know people hop on the customer care lines and on the reception. How important is that to the culture of Allbirds?
Yeah, it's been there from the beginning. We launched with one shoe. We sold one shoe for the first 14 months. And we made something like 20 changes as we found more sustainable materials, more comfortable ways to make the product, or wanted to update and tweak the design. There's never been a version 2, there's only been a version 1. And it's something more akin to technology. And now fast forward to 3.5 years in, that Wool Runner, our iconic first shoe, has been updated nearly 40 times. And that's the contract we have with our customer, is that we're going to listen, we're going to improve. And as we find more sustainable materials or better ways to do things, we're going to flow that right into the product. Not on some sort of calendar that's tied to a wholesale plan with some sort of third party. It's directly with our customer, and that's the contract we have. And I think it's a big advantage relative to a footwear category that almost is entirely attached to wholesale.
How do you test culture, say at the hiring stage? How do you know if someone will fit in? Do they really have to back the sustainability message from day one, or is it something that can kind of be sort of tested over time?
Yeah, I think we're looking for a range of values that from the beginning, when we only had 6 people, we spent a lot of time codifying those, and there's 3 of them. And the first one is about the ability to simplify, to take really complex situations and simplify them so that you can act, to be intentional, to be really, really thoughtful in the way that you act. And then most importantly, the third one is around curiosity. And so you don't need to necessarily be an environmental activist to come and work at Allbirds, but you do need to be incredibly curious about that problem, to understand why it's such an issue, and to work out how we as a business might be able to solve it. And those sort of values and hiring for them has been really, really important for us. And it's been foundational for a team now that's north of 300 people.
Do you think this is new in the world of work? Do you think that people are, maybe coming out of college or coming out of school and actually acting on their values rather than going straight for the money or straight for what their parents want them to do? Do you think people are really taking time to kind of look into companies and make sure that their values and their mission statement matches what they want to do? Absolutely.
I mean, I think there's a fundamental belief, certainly in the young people that work for us, that business can be a force for good. We're a registered B Corp, which I know is less of a movement in the UK, but is a big, big thing happening in the US, where you actually are able to make the environment and other causes enshrined in your governance. And we've done that with the environment, and it's been amazing to see how many young people coming out of college are only prepared to work for a B Corp. And I think there's 2,500 odd B Corps now in the States, and it's growing. And I think it's this idea that business isn't just about profit, it's also about purpose, and those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
And how is entrepreneurship? Are you satisfied with how entrepreneurship is kind of, being treated maybe at school level, or where does it begin? For you, it started, on the soccer field. Maybe it was the discipline and, the goal kind of mentality. Coming from San Francisco, it seems like the home of entrepreneurship in many ways. Silicon Valley, the idea that big ideas are being developed and scaled globally, seemingly overnight. It feels like such a popular topic at the moment, and I think less sort of focus has been made on just how difficult of a thing it is to do. Building a business and taking something from nothing to something is very, very, very difficult, and not for everyone, but it's incredibly rewarding. And the journey we've been on with Allbirds, started the best part of a decade ago, was a bad idea for a long time, and has now become a good one through a lot of hard work. But I think we're only just beginning. Because you feel that if you couldn't maybe have realised your dream in New Zealand, you felt that you had to go to Silicon Valley to go into that environment for it to work. There's something about the access to talent, there's something about the fundraising environment that allowed us to raise a little bit of money in the early days when we had a little bit more than an idea, and the culture of taking risks, of imagining things at huge scale and then backing yourself to go and build that very, very quickly. I think is not unique to that part of the world, but it's certainly very prevalent there, and it was an important part of our business. So that's where we did it. It's not to say that it couldn't be done in other places, but certainly, there's a lot of great case studies in San Francisco to look to in terms of doing what we're trying to do. Yeah. Do you think that that's something that you maybe took off the the soccer field? Is this kind of, set of characteristics maybe that lends itself to being an entrepreneur as well, from being a professional athlete to being an entrepreneur?
It's about being part of a team. It's about understanding the bits that you do well, and then equally and possibly more importantly the bits that you don't, and then compensating for those by hiring for them. I think the ability to get a group of people pointed in one direction going after something that's larger than themselves is easy to say and much, much harder to do, but we've been really, really fortunate in the talent that we've been able to attract at Allbirds, and we've had a small team that's growing now, but has moved mountains in pursuit of building a business in not even 4 years that now has a global footprint with offices in San Francisco, Shanghai, in the UK, and a growing retail footprint in Europe and soon to be New Zealand as well, so it's exciting.
You're expanding into Europe?
Yes, yeah, so we launched in 12 countries in Europe on the 1st of July. We're really, really excited about that market.
Digital only?
Digital only for the moment, although there's a store soon to be opening in Germany, which is an exciting market for us. And we've been really, really excited. I think from the beginning there's been demand for our products from that part of the world, and I think it's another opportunity for us to learn a different type of consumer, another part of the world that in many ways is more advanced than America, and where we're based in terms of talking about the environment, certainly with governments and the likes of Norway, Finland, that are making really aggressive climate pledges, which is really, really positive. So we're really excited to be there, and it's another opportunity for us to learn.
What will be the difference between the retail companies that survive and don't? Do you think that environment has to be really top of the priority list for anyone selling a product now?
Here's the situation. I think this is the problem of our generation. I think that history will judge us quite carefully, quite harshly in terms of how we act at the moment. And the businesses that are preparing now to be carbon neutral are the ones that are going to win in the long run. I think it's really simple. You need to be doing 3 things. You need to be measuring your carbon impact. You need to be offsetting that to zero, and then you need to be driving that number down as you would manage any other line item within your business. And it's not important. It's too late to wait. Now's the time for action on this issue. It feels like every other week there's another report that comes out that talks to the impending doom and of the environmental crisis that we're in. So I think it's incumbent on business to act and act now.
It's obviously a huge focus for you guys. It's in really the DNA of Allbirds. Is the fashion industry at large woken up to it, or is there enough action, do you think?
I think it's a really interesting moment. I think on the one hand there's this enormous consumer understanding of the problem, and then I think there's a lack of action or understanding of how people should best act. And so I think the issue's quite complicated and quite emotional, and at times politically divisive, and I don't think it needs to be. I think it needs to be treated as a simple economic argument that is about measuring and offsetting your carbon and driving your business to net zero, and it's achievable and it's doable. And I think once you're effectively taxing yourself, you have a cost and an understanding of your impact, and then the incentive to drive that down and to improve. And I think that's a direction that every business, if they're not already, should be moving towards. And I think it's the future of how we're going to solve this problem.
Do you get a lot of optimism from the customer walking in your door? Because I guess a lot of them would kind of be coming in almost sort of buying into the story itself. Say, take for example the millennial consumer 18 to 35. Do you draw a lot of kind of hope for the future customer from what they're coming in wanting to buy? Every
day, the level of curiosity, the level of knowledge and understanding about materials, their desire for transparency. And I think it's interesting. When we first started, even 3 or 4 years ago, we would go to our manufacturers and we would say that we wanted to pay more money to invest in sustainable materials, and they'd look at us like they had 6 heads. And now, even in just a few years, they're coming to us with solutions which in many cases have been around for decades. And we can feel this momentum building in our supply chain, on the consumer level, in governments, in terms of moving towards solving this problem. And my sense is things are going to move quickly. So again, the businesses that are preparing now are the ones that are going to win in the long run. So I think that this doesn't have to be an emotional story. It can be a business-centric, business-focused one too.
So do you think we're at a point where people aren't just buying on price? they're also buying on the impact?
I think people buy great product experiences, and they shouldn't have to sacrifice. I think it's incumbent on business to find ways to make those products as sustainably as they can. I don't think that this problem is going to be solved by people waking up tomorrow and all of a sudden changing the way they behave. It may happen at the margins, but comprehensively this is about it's about business really leaning in to finding solutions. And look, if we can put a man on the moon, we can find a way to make a t-shirt and a pair of trainers more sustainably. And you know what's been so encouraging in the short space of time that Allbirds has been around is the number of positive steps we've been able to make when you really commit to the idea that sustainability is a non-negotiable, not something that's tacked on at the end. And we're highly encouraged, just as we know that there's a lot of stuff that we need to do better as well.
Do you think that sustainability is valuable yet within a company? Like, say for example, you guys aren't listed, but for companies maybe that have shareholders, is sustainability, you know, a really important part that people take account of now, or has it reached that critical mass where it is valuable yet?
Yeah, I think if you're working in a business or leading a business or a part of a business or giving your business to another business that's not thinking about sustainability, you're on the wrong side of history. And I think that you're also probably going to be at a competitive disadvantage as the momentum around this topic and of the cost of carbon and of putting a price on that for businesses, you know, it's probably bad strategy.
Your co-founder, Joey, he has come from a biotech background. Now that you kind of look back on the last 2 years, what has he brought to the company that maybe you were lacking in, or where do you meet as well on?
He'd committed his career to the idea that there was this impending revolution in the way things were being made, and he's brought an enormous amount of knowledge and experience and just desire to the idea that Allbirds, albeit small, even with just a few people, could be part of the solution. And I think sometimes when you read the news, you feel like every single week there's a story that points to something worse about the environment, that it's almost an impossible, intractable situation. And I think he's brought a measure of hope that business can do things well, and that if getting a little bit better every day, much like you would in practicing on the sports field, can really compound over time and make a big difference. And I think we've seen that with 3 or 4 years in at Allbirds, that we've started to make some really significant change happen.
If there's a budding entrepreneur out there watching this and they think that they really would like to make sustainability, you know, a core part of their business, how do they make it viable? What would be your advice? I don't think that it's even a question. If anyone's out there is imagining a business and sustainability isn't a part of that strategy, I don't think they're thinking about it the right way. So I think that's the moment that we're in. So this isn't a nice to have anymore, it's an absolute non-negotiable, and I think everyone should be thinking about that. And they shouldn't be thinking about marketing around the topic of sustainability as much as they should be acting on it. And you know, I think there's an enormous business opportunity, and it's very hard in some cases to retrofit very large businesses that haven't thought about this until now or just recently. It's much easier to start this with a blank sheet of paper. So I think that there's an enormous opportunity for new ideas to come in and show how this can be done. And I'd like to think that Allbirds is one small example of the advantage of building this from the ground up with sustainability as every part of the way that we do business. Just looking ahead now, finally, maybe the next kind of 3 to 5 years, what will grow this vision a little bit more? Would you ever think of going public at all, or do you think that you have a lot of work to do, kind of organically? Yeah,
we've got a lot of things to do. I think we're incredibly excited about 3 things: the retail and the role of our offline business and our online business, and international, continuing to find that global customer that is really connected to our mission and purpose, I think is a big opportunity. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is continuing to innovate with new material innovations. It's such an interesting opportunity, and I feel like many of these materials have been around for decades, and the ability to create them have been around for decades to create more environmentally friendly solutions. And the phone's starting to ring now, And I think Allbirds is being seen as a conduit, as a business that has the business model and the margins to invest in these materials. And it's really, really exciting. So the product pipeline that we're starting to form, I think suggests a really exciting future for us.
Exciting times ahead.
Hopefully so.
Tim Brown, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.